What's up everybody? So in this video we're going to be looking at this cutie hippopotamus, but we're also going to be talking about everything that you need to know for C4.2, everything in one video. I don't know how long it's going to be, maybe an hour and 20 minutes or so, I can't predict, but you know, it's all in one video, all here just for you guys. Now here we got Moto. His name's so nice you can say it twice. He's recommending you go check out teachme.org. If he finds it cool, then it is cool. So go check out teachme.org for awesome notes and tons of IB style questions. So without further ado, let's get started with food chains here. A food chain is relatively straightforward, the definition. All it really does is it's a sequence showing the feeding relationship. So what eats what? And how energy flows between the species, right? Because when you consume another organism, you're transferring the energy from that organism to you. So we're gonna use here a desert food chain as an example, right? And remember, don't forget the importance of sunlight. Each food chain needs sunlight, and we'll see exactly how important it is soon. So let's start off here with a cactus, right? Each food chain starts off with some sort of plant. Why? Because a plant doesn't have a mouth. It can't go and eat something else. It doesn't have the legs to go and run and chase something and find it and eat it to consume its energy. No, it gets its energy from sunlight, right? We know it can harvest that light energy and turn it into chemical energy, right? That's the beautiful thing here. That's called photosynthesis. No other organisms can do that. It must be plants or some specific kind of bacteria can do it. Now, so that's why the food chains usually always start with a plant. Now, the next part's straightforward. Something's gotta now, because now this plant has all this chemical energy. Now something has gotta eat it. Something's gotta eat it. So you'll see here in the bottom, I'm always gonna have this key here. The first thing in the food chain we call the producer. All right? So now something's gonna eat it. So let's see what organism we got here. We got a jerboa, okay? It lives in the desert, and this kind of freaky looking animal, it's gonna go and eat some of this cactus, okay? So notice here the arrows. The arrow is pointing from the cactus to the jerboa. So what does the arrow really mean? So it's not like the arrow is pointing from the jerboa to the cactus to imply that the jerboa is eating the cactus. No, this arrow is showing something specific, okay? And it's showing energy transfer, okay? So notice here, energy flow. So the arrow represents energy flow. The energy is now flowing from the cactus to whatever is eating it, right? So you can see here, this thing that's eating the producer, okay, is a primary consumer. Primary meaning first. So it's the first thing in the food chain that's going to eat something else, right? But then it doesn't stop there. Something else is going to eat the jerboa. So now the arrow is going to continue. The energy from the jerboa is now going to be transferred to another organism above in the food chain. So in this case, let's say it's a snake. So what do you think we're going to call this level in the food chain? So by the way, each of these levels, when I say this, the first one in the food chain is the producer, and the second one is the primary consumer, and the third one is the, let's say, secondary consumer. What are all these positions mean? All of these positions are called trophic levels. So a trophic level is where a particular animal or organism is within a food chain. So it doesn't have to be animal, it can be like a plant, or something like that, right? Because a plant is the producer. So it's where a particular animal, plant, or organism, let's just change it to organism because I don't want to confuse anyone, is within a food chain. So far we got producer, primary consumer, and secondary consumer. Now finally, this one will then get eaten by something else, say in this case the fennec fox. So we can see this one will then be the tertiary consumer. Now, again, just to emphasize the energy flow. So remember now, very important, ultimately what happened is this plant, the producer, converted light energy into chemical energy. And now this chemical energy is being passed on between each of these trophic levels, all right? Now, the important thing to consider is, again, sunlight. I need to talk more about sunlight. So sunlight sustains most ecosystems because it is the initial energy source, right? It's the initial energy source that plants use to start off this whole food chain, okay? Now, there are exceptions. There are some sorts of food chains that exist on our planet that don't rely on sunlight. So for example, say there are areas that are deep under the ocean, okay, deep, 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 where no light can penetrate, or even in caves where no light can penetrate. That doesn't mean there's no food chain in there. If you go in there, maybe you'll find some organisms and their own kind of unique food chain. But we'll talk about it more later in this video, but they have their own ways of starting their food chain without using sunlight, and we'll talk about that soon, okay? Now, but obviously those are exceptions. So 99.9% of food chains are sustained by sunlight. Now, I want to emphasize how important sunlight is using a little example of a dinosaur. You know, our dinosaurs, I find this pretty cool, it's running right at you right now. Dinosaurs, remember, do you know why they were wiped out? Why they got extinct? So the biggest theory at the moment by scientists is that a while ago, there was a massive asteroid that hit the Earth, okay? And that asteroid caused severe atmospheric debris. So basically dust in the atmosphere, very thick layers of dust. And that meant that sunlight, when it goes towards the Earth, is kind of prevented to reach the plants because of this dust layer that has now been formed. Because now there's so thick layers of dust in the air that sunlight cannot penetrate towards the plants. That means our plants, our producers here, cannot do photosynthesis, and that means our whole food chain is all messed up. So all these organisms are going to suffer as a consequence of it, and especially the last ones in the food chain, like a big organism, like a dinosaur, because if they don't get their enough food, they will very quickly die. So that's actually to show how important sunlight is in sustaining a food chain, okay? We need them badly. Okay, couple very important things here. A producer, so the first thing here in a food chain is usually an autotroph. It's an autotroph, something, remember auto means automatically or by itself, and troph means to feed. So it's an organism, not always a plant, but most of the time, that can make its own food. It's an autotroph, like a plant using sunlight. Now the second one, so usually the primary consumer, usually, not always, it's a herbivore. Okay, so a heterotroph is an organism that eats something else to get its food. Remember, an autotroph could make its own food. A heterotroph, hetero means other, meaning it needs to eat other things in order to get in its food. It's an heterotroph. Now, we have different categories of heterotrophs. So for example, usually the primary consumer is a herbivore, meaning it eats plants, right? Because that's usually the first thing that starts off our food chain. Now, the second thing can maybe also be a herbivore, but usually it's a carnivore or an omnivore, something that can eat something that is made up of meat, right? Same with the last one, usually a carnivore. Now, here's the big thing that I don't want you guys to get confused. Here's the sentence. Animals can have variation in their trophic level. A jerboa is not always a primary consumer. Sometimes it's a secondary consumer or even tertiary consumer. It depends on how many organisms there are at a given moment. Sometimes there's something even smaller than a jerboa that eats a cactus. In that case, that other organism becomes the primary consumer and the jerboa becomes the secondary consumer. So there is variation in the trophic levels. It's not set in stone, and we're going to see it a bit later when we talk about food webs. Okay, so we'll see it much better when we talk about food webs. So, amigos, in summary, the sunlight is so important because it's needed directly by autotrophs, but it's needed indirectly by these subsequent trophic levels. No sunlight means no cactus, which means no food for the jerboa, which means no food for the snake. So these require sunlight indirectly, okay? Now here are just two other food chains for you guys who are not interested in the desert food chain. Just some nice funny art for you guys. Food chain for the sea and for the savannah. If you're from South Africa like me, you'll like this one. Anyways, just another example. Nothing special, nothing unique or extra here for you guys. So now we're gonna go a little bit more into our food chain, right? We saw all of this stuff. We're gonna go now into a little bit detail of what an autotroph and what a heterotroph is, because it's so important to understand when it comes to food chains. So we already talked a little bit about it, right? Here, I already told you autotrophs are these self-feeding organisms, also known as producers. Now, what do they really do? The key thing here is they are able to, amazing, the scientific definition here you guys gotta know. These are organisms that can synthesize or make organic matter, which we know of as food, from inorganic matter. What does that mean? Okay, there's a bit of a complicated sentence. Look here. Organic matter is very simple. You can think of it like food. We know we're made up of billions of these small living things called cells. Now, let's take it one step further. What is a cell made of? A cell has been found to be made up of 4 macromolecules: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. This is the fundamental molecules that we're made up of, the 4 macromolecules. These are all organic matter. Why? What do they have in common that makes them organic matter? Organic matter is anything, any substance that contains carbon to hydrogen bonds. Okay, so if you look at these guys' actual chemical structure, you'll notice they have a lot of carbon to hydrogen bonds. They have a lot of, their base is carbon, and they have all these carbon to hydrogen bonds. Whereas on the contrary, this is the extent to which you guys need to know it. And on the contrary, inorganic matter is anything that does not have CH bonds. So there's so many things: minerals, phosphate, calcium, iron, carbon dioxide. There's no hydrogen here, so there's no carbon to hydrogen bond. Sulfate, pneumonia, water. All of these things are inorganic matter, okay? Very, very simple. So by definition, a autotroph can basically take inorganic matter, whichever they need, and make these things from. And that's amazing, because this is what living things are really constituted of, the 4 macromolecules. And this is what we need when we eat food, the heterotrophs, because these guys are going to feed on these autotrophs, so they want these things, right? Because we can't make these things ourselves, so we need to get them from somewhere else. So we're going to have to hope the plant can make these things so we can take it from the plants, right? So that's very, very important. Okay, so you need to know that there are 2 kinds of autotrophs, okay? 2 kinds. Photoautotrophs and chemoautotrophs. We're going to look at chemoautotrophs when we get down here. Now, photoautotrophs, they can make their own organic matter from inorganic matter using photo, which is sunlight. So they can do photosynthesis, right? That's the process of using sunlight to make organic matter from inorganic matter, okay? By the way, some examples of photoautotrophs, because a lot of people get confused here. It's not just plants, okay? Plants are the ones we typically think of, but there are the ones we cannot see, that's why we don't remember them, but there are bacteria. So bear in mind, there are some bacteria that can also do photosynthesis, right? Just keep that idea in your mind. It's really not that important, but just don't think it's only plants. Okay, now here we have a diagram of the basic process of photosynthesis. Obviously, there's a whole video explaining photosynthesis, so don't go crazy here. Just the big picture is all enough. You can see here, a plant will use carbon dioxide, right, which is inorganic matter, water, which is inorganic matter, sunlight, which is not organic matter, it's inorganic matter, and it will make glucose, okay? Not only glucose, but the one you guys need to know about, the IB, is photosynthesis makes glucose, but many of these other macromolecules can also be made, okay, through their own little processes. But the point is, we converted inorganic matter into organic matter and oxygen, right? So that's the amazing thing. This is amazing, because from these organic matters being synthesized, we can build big proteins, we can build big polysaccharides, big lipids, right? Which our bodies can use to survive, right? That's very important. Now we got to come to the question of what's the point of the sunlight? Why do they need sunlight again? The big reason that they needed sunlight is because sunlight, if you learned in photosynthesis, was used to split water and release electrons and protons. But these electrons were very useful because they were used in the process of photosynthesis to help make this organic molecule, okay? But other than electrons being useful in photosynthesis, they are also very useful in cell respiration. When you guys learn about the process of making ATP, right, through cell respiration, you'll notice electrons were also used there. So I just want you to remember that sunlight is used by photoautotrophs because it helps them form these electrons, which are used in both photosynthesis and cell respiration to make ATP. And we know how important ATP is, right? Okay, now that's enough there. Okay, that's all you guys need to know for that part. Now the second category of autotrophs is chemoautotrophs. Remember here, I told you guys that there are exceptions. For example, areas that don't have sunlight, like caves and ocean depths. Yeah, that's true. What do these guys do? What kind of autotrophs live live in these places? How do they make these organic molecules from inorganic molecules if they don't have sunlight? They can't do photosynthesis. Well, these guys can create cellular energy, so like organic matter and things like that, without the use of sunlight. So some examples that you guys should know, this is pretty much just for bacteria. Okay, there's plants don't do this kind of thing. It's really bacteria. That's why you guys probably wouldn't know about this category. Now, we need to know about one specific example, iron oxidizing bacteria, just because we need to relate it to this to see why this matters. So in the ocean depths where there's no sunlight, so these organisms have adapted to making their organic matter or their glucose-like molecules without sunlight. So let me show you how it works. So say there's this freak of nature living down there, right? It's some kind of bacteria. Let's say this is an iron oxidizing bacteria. The same way that electrons was needed here for cell respiration and photosynthesis, they also need electrons to make ATP and to make their own glucose-like molecules, right? They also need to form organic molecules, just like photosynthesis does. But they don't have sunlight to give them those electrons. So what they do is, at least this category, the iron oxidizing ones, is in this ocean depth, these hydrothermal vents, for example, very deep under the ocean, there's a lot of little minerals and things like that, like iron. Okay, so what they're specialized at doing is they can take this iron, the form that we call Fe2+, and they can convert it into a form called Fe3+. This is a oxidation reaction. Okay, remember oxidation is, you learn it in another chapter where you learn about cell respiration. Oxidation is loss of electron. So you can see this bacteria is going to oxidize this iron, causing it to lose an electron, okay? But now it's gonna, in doing so, it converts it from Fe2+ to Fe3+, and this extra electron is gonna be used by this bacteria to do the very same things that happened here, to do cell respiration, to make ATP, to make organic matter, not in photosynthesis, but in chemosynthesis, right? Okay, so that's really a cool example to help you understand kind of one example of how chemoautotrophs works. Don't worry, you don't need to know how these other two work. Just know that the principle is the same. Instead of using iron, they will use some other kind of inorganic molecule, okay, to be able to make organic matter using their own way, okay? But just make sure to remember, I would say, this one. It's fine. The iron one, that's what all three of the books that I read talked about this one. So really, don't worry about the other ones. This is enough. All right. So now, that's it for our autotrophs, okay? Autotrophs. Making sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, let's go to autotrophs. Very simple. This one's way easier than autotrophs. So if you've gone through this one will be a breeze. So these are organisms that obtain their food by consuming organic matter, okay? Because they can't make their own food. They have to eat something else to get this carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, right? So very much like the hyena here. Anything with a freaking mouth will do this one, okay? So there are categories, right? We all know these. I'm not going to go heavy into these. We're going to talk a bit more about Detritivores and Saprotrophs later in this video. But for now, just know that many categories: plant eaters, meat eaters, eating both, decomposing dead things. These are the decomposers, okay? Now, the big idea we need to know here is very important. When we eat food, what's the point of eating food? We're eating food so we can break down this organic matter. So for example, we want to break down our proteins into what makes up proteins, which is amino acids. So we're going to eat these proteins, we're going to break them down into the constituent amino acids. We're going to break down our big carbohydrates that are made up of like a polysaccharide. We want to break it down into a monosaccharide. Our fatty acids, we want to break down into our triglycerides, these fats, we want to break down into fatty acids. The point is, we want to break down all of this organic matter that we ate into their basic components, right? Just like I just mentioned. Because now, if we have these basic components, we can synthesize our own proteins that we need. Maybe you don't need that protein that the organism you had ate, but you want to make your own proteins. And at the end of the day, all organisms make their own proteins with amino acids. So if we can just break down their proteins into the amino acids and reassemble it into our own proteins, then that's great. So you can think of it like Lego, right? To build a new structure, you need to take apart this big structure that has been built and arrange it, put it back together in a different order to get a new structure. That's why we eat other things, so we can break them down and reassemble them into what we need. That's called assimilation, all right? that's it for this part, guys. Next, let's go into food webs. If you've understood food chains, food webs is super, super easy. So the reality is that a food chain is very simplified to what's actually going on in an ecosystem, right? In reality, there's not one sequence of things that happens. There's way many more combinations that can actually happen. So a food web is the linkage of food chains to form a more realistic picture of feeding patterns in a habitat. Now I want to show you something really important, really important here. So look, one food chain in this food web is this antelope eating the tree and the lion eating the antelope. An example can be the antelope eating grass and then the lion eating the antelope. Okay, there are many combinations. Now what I want to show you here is this. I want to emphasize this part. Animals can have variation in their trophic level. I had this exact same sentence right here because now it's going to be easy to understand. Look here. Let's look at the hyena. I made it 2 colors, the background here, for a reason. Okay, because in one of scenarios, it is a secondary consumer. And in another food chain, it is a tertiary consumer. So this clearly shows that an animal's trophic level can vary depending what food chain we're considering. So in this one here, where the ostrich from South Africa eats the grass, the hyena can eat an ostrich. In this case, what is it? It is a secondary consumer because it eats the primary consumer. But in this scenario here, let's say the beetle eats the grass and then the meerkat eats the beetle. Now the hyena eats the meerkat. In this scenario, the hyena is a tertiary consumer, right? The arrow pointing here to the red part. Same with the lion, okay? It can have multiple levels. So this is just one simple example because a food web can be really complex, okay? But I want to keep it simple so you understand the point of it, okay? So we get now the whole shebang about food chains and food webs. We're almost there, but there's one more component that we did not consider. And that is the question of what happens to the things after they die. We know that maybe when they were killed and then consumed, passing the energy from one trophic level to the next, but not everything is consumed. There's going to be some dead parts of this snake or this jerboa that's going to be lying there in the soil. Maybe this jerboa just got lost and couldn't find its homies and just ran out of food and died, right? There are various reasons. But now the question is, what happens to these things that have passed away, that have died? Because it's important to consider when we consider this whole cycle we're talking about. When they die, it's very important. Now comes into play the role of the decomposers. Do you guys remember here when we talked about heterotrophs? 2 of these categories were Detritivores and Saprotrophs. These are decomposers. Their whole job is to break down dead organic matter. And when these things die, what are they? Dead organic matter, because they're all made up of proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids, right? They're organic matter, but they're dead. And these guys, they're 2 categories for a reason, because they work. Their mechanism of breaking down this dead organic matter is a bit different. Let me show you. So Detritivores, these are decomposers that break down dead organic matter by direct consumption. They digest whatever this dead organic matter is, they digest it internally. The key word here, internally. Okay, so they digest it internally and then they may absorb the nutrients, right? Now, the contrary, the Saprotrophs, they also break down dead organic matter, but they do it externally. So these guys are going to release enzymes. Remember, enzymes are like little tools that can have a specific function in our body. So in this case, this enzyme's job will be to break down the food that it landed on. So it's going to land on the dead food, the dead organic matter, and break it down into smaller parts that can be absorbed as nutrients by the Saprotrophs, right? So that's important. Now, some examples. So the Detritivores can be earthworms, woodlice, other insects. The Saprotrophs can be things like fungi and bacteria. Don't worry too much about the real examples. I just want you guys really to know the difference in their mechanism because that can be quizzed upon. The keywords internally and externally, okay? Externally. Now, let's finish the picture here. There are 2 things that these decomposers are really doing. I already mentioned one. One of them is they can use this dead organic matter for cell respiration. They can absorb the nutrients so that they can break down the dead organic matter to make ATP, because they're also organisms and they need ATP as well to survive, right? But what makes them special, what makes them decomposers, is they can also, the remainder of this dead organic matter is converted or further broken down or decomposed into inorganic components. Remember, a plant was able to take inorganic, or an autotroph rather, was able to take these inorganic nutrients and make organic nutrients, right? That's what was special about the autotrophs. Now this guy, now imagine if they keep using all of these inorganic nutrients, eventually it's gonna run out and they can't function anymore. They can't do photosynthesis anymore or chemosynthesis anymore, and this whole cycle will end. So somehow we need to bring back or recycle those inorganic nutrients. And here is where it happens. These decomposers can then further break down to unlock these inorganic components that is useful for other organisms like a plant, right? And all those inorganic components are just going to become part of the soil when they're broken, when they do their job. And again, that's the point. Plants need healthy soil. And what that means is enough inorganic components like iron and whatever, a lot of things, nitrates, water, carbon dioxide, all of these inorganic things. So to make it extra clear for you guys here, remember here, these are our organic things. I told you, organic things are anything that has a carbon to hydrogen bond. So our lipids here, our carbohydrate here, we have a whole video on each of these, by the way, so don't get freaked out here. You don't need to know how to draw this for this video. For this chapter, I'm just trying to make a full recap here. And proteins, but they have all these components, right, that constitute these macromolecules, and we need to recycle them, break them down to recycle them into the inorganic components, such as carbon dioxide, such as nitrates, ammonium, sulfide, all the things that do not have carbon to hydrogen bonds, because they are needed, these inorganic components, by our plants. So we can finish and complete this cycle. Otherwise, we can't keep on going and it's not sustainable, right? So here's one example. These decomposers that might take a protein and break it down into ammonia, because look, there's an N here, and N part of the structure is still a organic molecule. But if we break it down further and further and release this nitrogen in the form of nitrates, now it's inorganic and can be used by a plant in the soil. So that's the big idea. I hope it makes sense. Hope it's not too confusing, but we need these guys to recycle inorganic nutrients. Just because we cannot do that, right? They have the machinery, the enzymes to break down these guys into inorganic components. Me and you, this jerboa, we don't have the machinery or the tools to carry out this decomposition process. We don't have the enzymes to break them down and recycle them into organic nutrients, which is exactly why we need these decomposers so badly in our ecosystem. Without them, we can't recycle them and we can't have the cycle continue on. Now, remember, I just want to put this here. It's really not crazy important for you guys. All of these inorganic things, all these elements that we need, this hydrogen, oxygen, calcium, iron, potassium, sodium, they're all incorporated in some form in our body in the four macromolecules that we mentioned, okay, whether it's proteins or whatever it is. So all of these things need to be recycled so that plants can use it to make themselves and we can consume them, okay? Recycling is very key, and it does not only apply to carbon, all of the things that make up our body. Just some things like carbon is more important than these other ones, all right? So the last little step here, we're almost there. We're coming now down to energy losses between trophic levels, right? So we know this arrow, right, this big black one, represents the transfer of energy from this trophic level to this one as this jerboa consumes the cactus, right? And the same for the other trophic levels. Now, the very key thing you guys need to know is that the energy transfer between here and here is not 100%, okay? Energy is lost between the trophic level in three key ways. You guys need to know this, okay? So the first one, most basic one that you guys can understand, is not consumed. This jerboa, okay, maybe he's more like me. He likes meat more than plants, and he goes and he starts eating this like, oh my gosh, that's just terrible. So he does not transfer, all the energy is not transferred from here to him completely because some of this cactus was not consumed. See, so that's one way in which energy is lost, right? Because he did not transfer all the energy from here to there, right? So that's one way in which energy is lost between trophic levels. Okay, so this is usually for things, if we don't use a cactus as an example, usually for things like bones, hair, or if some organism dies and it's never found, so it can't be eaten. But remember, these is not permanently lost. Why? Because the remainder of this cactus can then be eaten by some other organism, or if this cactus dies, it can be decomposed by detritivores, as we just mentioned, right? This dead plant can be broken down by detritivores to recycle the nutrients, or it can be used for cell respiration by these decomposers. So it's not permanently lost. It can still be used by some other organism or these decomposers, right? Very, very key. The next one is assimilation. So sometimes, for example, a jerboa, yes, or let's say a snake. Let's use a snake here as an example. He eats the jerboa, okay? But his body, his digestive system decides to only absorb some nutrients, and the rest he decides to poo or pee out, okay? He doesn't need everything. There's only some nutrients that's required. So the idea of when an organism doesn't break down or absorb all the nutrients from the thing it eats, that's called not being assimilated. So assimilated is the process of breaking down, absorbing, and using nutrients in your body and to build other structures like proteins or carbohydrate and things like that. So when you're not doing that and you're getting rid of it as waste, then this means it's not assimilated. Okay, so pee or poo-poo or poop and pee-pee. So again, but this way it's not permanently lost, because this, my friend, guess what, is dead organic matter. So detritivores, these guys, these poop eaters, and these dead organic eaters, they're gonna be able to use that for their own food, or to be able to recycle it into inorganic nutrients for soil, so plants can use it. So, or even honestly, my beagle, he would eat poop. So even other organisms, it doesn't have to be detritivores. Something out there is hungry enough to do it. Okay, these two, very important. Hope you understand them and understand it's not permanently lost. Now this last one is very, very critical for you guys. Cell respiration. So this jerboa, right? He eats this cactus. Let's say he eats the whole cactus, okay? So let's say all the energy is transferred to him. Guess what? If he starts moving around, trying to find his next meal, or his body tries to generate heat through cell respiration, because cell respiration is the process of making ATP, right? So that these organisms can carry out metabolism and do all the functions for survival. But as a byproduct of making ATP, you generate a lot of heat. So when you break down, say, a glucose molecule in cell respiration, most of it is broken down into heat, released as a byproduct of heat. Only some of it will actually generate ATP. So heat is a waste product or a byproduct. So when this jerboa eats this cactus, and let's say all the nutrients come into him, and he starts running around trying to find a mate, food, trying to escape a predator, he's doing cell respiration the whole time. If it's cold at night, he's doing cell respiration to generate heat. All of this is food that he ate that is now being burnt and used by his body. So it's being depleted. So in that way, the nutrient that used to be inside him is now being used. So now when it's passed to when the snake eats him, the snake is not going to get those nutrients that the cactus used to have, because the jerboa used it to do cell respiration. So that's another way in which energy is lost, when these guys actually break down and use the food to do cell respiration, okay? But the big difference here is about the permanent part. Cell respiration, let me read this for you. This can be better if I read it. So cell respiration generates ATP, which I said, to carry out metabolism and physical activity when he's running around and cold at night or whatever. While generating ATP, most of the energy is lost as heat. And now, here's the key thing. Heat is good to keep us warm, but once it leaves the body, it is no longer a biological energy source, meaning organisms like me and you, or a plant even, cannot convert heat energy back into chemical energy. So let me write this here. Energy, it's gonna be better. Because remember the key idea in science, if you're physics or chemistry or biology even, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred from one source to another. So it's wrong to say here that that energy is lost in the form of heat. It's only transferred to heat energy. But we consider it lost because we cannot use it anymore. We are unable to convert heat energy into chemical energy for us to use. So hence, when we do cell respiration and we lose and we generate heat as a byproduct, that is energy permanently lost, quote, quote, lost, because we cannot use it anymore. So these two are not permanently lost because decomposers can use it and recycle things, but heat cannot be used by anything, not decomposers, not me and you. We cannot change it back into chemical energy. It is fair to say it is lost. Oh, that's the wrong way around. That's going to cringe some of you guys. So it's lost permanently. Okay, so that's very important. Understand this one is permanent loss, but it's okay. Why is it okay? Because we have our sun. Sun is continuously giving us light energy, and thanks to our plants, we can use the light energy to make more chemical energy and sustain our food chains and food webs, even though we're continuously losing heat energy permanently. Okay, so thanks to our sun, we have an incoming energy source, even though we have this outgoing energy source. Now we have enough to go and talk about energy pyramid. Again, everything that you've learned so far is going to help you understand the energy pyramid. So let's just go straight to it. So an energy pyramid, this is something that shows energy transfer between trophic levels, right? So again, they call it energy pyramid because it looks like a pyramid and it shows a transfer of energy, right? Not only the amount of energy transfer, but also how fast. And you'll see what I mean by this shortly. The thing is, why you need to know about the energy pyramid is because they could ask you to draw one in a exam, or they could ask you to interpret one in an exam, like label certain things or talk about it. So it is important because it could be used, okay? It definitely comes up. I've seen it enough coming up. Okay, so we can see here the lowest square here is going to be of an energy pyramid is always the producer. So let's say it's grass. Okay, grass. We know the primary consumer is going to eat the grass. And we just talked about, literally just now, we talked about how not all of the energy is transferred from the producer to the primary consumer, right? There are many ways in which this energy is lost, especially heat energy, because it's a permanent loss, right? It's actually gone, whereas these can still be used by decomposers and things like that. Okay, so we know automatically the width of this pyramid shows how much energy it has. So we can see the producer has a lot of energy, okay, a lot of energy. And then we can say the transfer of the energy to the primary consumer is less. So there's very little energy remaining compared to how much there was in the producer level. That's because only 10% of the energy was passed on. Isn't that crazy? So out of all these energy losses, only 10% was passed on to the next trophic level. That means what? That means 90% was freaking lost, okay, as heat or things like that I just mentioned. And it continues on. So now the primary consumer will have this 10% of the energy from the producer. And now, again, the energy will be passed to the secondary consumer. But again, the same way, 90% of this energy will now be lost. And only 10% will be passed on to the next trophic level because of all the energy loss regions that I mentioned. So this is very important. Okay, so the energy pyramid, it shows energy transfer. Trend 10% rule, blah, blah, blah. Now here, believe it or not, man, this is actually important. It comes up in multiple choice. They'll give you they'll ask you, what's the unit for energy in the energy pyramid? And then you need to, it will give you one of these, kilojoules, to -2, years to the -1. So you can see here that even part of the unit is years. So part of the unit of energy is time. So it does care about how fast the energy is being transferred. So you can see the unit comprises both space, because it's meters, time, and energy, kilojoules. Okay, but you can also write it like that. So make sure you know this, because in the exam they will write it. They could ask you, what's the units of it? So make sure you know it. I'm not telling you this for no reason. I'm telling you this out of experience. All right. Okay. So very good. So let's use an example here. So let's say the plant has 5,000 kilojoules, blah, 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 this unit of energy. And the producers, only 10% will be passed on to their consumers, because 90% of it is going to be lost through all those other ways that we talked about. So that means how much energy will the consumers have? 10% of that, which is 500. And then the same thing. So the next level will only have 50. So you can imagine this is part of the reason why trophic levels cannot have more than 4 or 5 levels, because eventually you run out of energy, meaning that you're not able to sustain another level. There's simply not enough organisms and not enough energy. Okay. Okay, so very important food chain. So the trophic levels are almost never longer than 5. It's usually 4 organisms. Since not all the biomass, remember, biomass is the weight, the dry weight, meaning how heavy a certain trophic level is. So since not all the biomass is consumed or digested or even lost as heat energy, so therefore each level will have less energy successively, and so eventually you'll have too little energy and organisms to supply another trophic level. All right? Okay, now this is separate from the energy pyramid, but I'm going to show it here. But don't confuse it with the energy pyramid. Sometimes there can be you'll see another pyramid that is based on biomass. Okay, so for example, in that case, the pyramid, the width will not represent energy; it will represent biomass. So, but the pattern, the curve, the energy pyramid will look very similar for a biomass pyramid compared to an energy pyramid, because it will show the dry mass, meaning they remove all the water. So they're only measuring the meat without any water. Because remember, your body is like 70% water. So the biomass is the dry mass of your body. And as we go from the lower trophic levels to the higher trophic levels for this curve, the biomass will also get smaller, right? You can imagine if you had to weigh all the beetles on Earth and weigh all the grass on Earth, the grass will be much heavier because there's way more grass. So the biomass will get lower as we go up the trophic levels. Now, here's the unit for biomass. Don't confuse this unit with the energy unit, okay? So make sure, I think the energy unit's much more important to remember for the test, but here is the biomass unit in case it's asked for some crazy reason when they want to eliminate you from getting a 7. Okay, now another curve you might see for pyramid that is not an energy pyramid like this one would be a number pyramid. So the pyramid would show numbers instead of energy. So in that case, it would be similar because the lower level will have the most organisms, and then the next trophic level will have slightly less organisms, and then the next one even less. This is very evident when you go to the safari and you try and find a lion. It's very hard to see a lion because there's way less lions at the higher trophic level compared to antelopes. You can see them everywhere, right? So the number pyramid would be very similar in shape too. So they will all have a similar shape, but this, remember the energy one, is the most important one. All right. You can actually imagine that food chains that have, or ecosystems that have more sunlight will be able to produce more autotrophs or more producers, because the more sunlight, more plants are happy, more energy will be in this layer of the trophic level. And if there's much more energy in this level, then you're more likely to sustain primary, secondary, tertiary, or even higher consumers. So places or ecosystems with more sunlight will likely have more layers to their food chains compared to areas like tundra or ice places that have lower sunlight, because they will have less producers to be able to form, and hence they will definitely sustain less trophic levels. Okay, so guys, summary diagram. We're almost here. I just want this to really quick. It's a really cool diagram. It's going to be a nice summary diagram you guys can use. Real quick, first, the words. So all organisms, right, were made up of organic parts and inorganic parts, are eventually consumed, and their organic part is released in the form of heat. Okay, this is non-recyclable. Okay, it's lost permanently, but thankfully we have sunlight to replenish that. But the inorganic part, so the nutrients like iron, water, carbon dioxide, blah, 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 all that stuff can be recycled by our detritivores and returned to the autotrophs, okay? So here, let me show you. So here's our little kind of energy pyramid, right? We can see it's a very artistic one here. Passing on. Remember, if this represents all energy, guess what? Remember, most of it is lost in the form of respiration heat. Okay, most of it is lost through respiration or heat from each trophic level. Let me make this. It's important to me, my aesthetics. Send to back. Okay, now remember, so most of it is lost as this. Some of it is lost because the organism died, or it's not consumed, not digested, not assimilated, as I mentioned before, with the energy. But these are not permanently lost. They can be used by decomposers, right? Which can break them down, okay, and recycle them as into inorganic nutrients, which can be used by our producers to continue this cycle. But decomposers can also use it for their own energy, produce their own heat, which can contribute to energy loss, right? And decomposers can obviously die themselves and be decomposed by their decomposer buddy friends, right? So it's a vicious cycle, but it's pretty much what it is. And I really like this diagram. I think it's very cool. Helps you really understand the big picture before we move on to the next part. So usually teachers introduce this topic, this whole topic, by starting with open and closed systems. But I find that is a confusing way to introduce it, because once you understand this stuff, understanding the open and closed system is actually a bit easier than starting with it. So let's talk here about what's the difference between an open and a closed system. So what we already know from this video is that energy can enter an ecosystem in the form of sunlight, so light energy. And we know the one permanent way in which it leaves an ecosystem is in the form of heat, right? We know when these organisms do cell respiration, heat is lost. And the thing is, we consider it lost because we cannot turn heat energy back into chemical energy. Heat is not the same as light energy, unfortunately. So it's really lost to us. So what's the difference between an open and a closed system? So an open system is when we take a certain area, some ecosystem, right? An ecosystem is just any area with all of its species and the abiotic environment, right? The area where they live, that's an ecosystem. So an ecosystem can be huge, like a whole forest, or it can be a little area on your skin because there's bacteria there, lots of different species, and the abiotic environment will be your skin, your sweat, and things like that. So an ecosystem is as big as you want it to be, okay? Now, an open system is when things can enter and exit that specific system. So we're using some ecosystem as an example here. So, an open system will be some ecosystem where organisms can enter or leave. So for example, let's first go slowly here. So an open system is a system where both energy and matter can enter and exit. So energy, what we mean is sunlight and can enter, right? And heat energy can leave, okay? But also organisms can enter and leave. So that's an open system. How can these organisms leave and enter this system, right? So if you take your some forest as an example of an open system, it's possible that organisms from another ecosystem migrate and enter that system because it's an open system. It allows organisms in and out. Maybe river flow, maybe a seed or fruit falls from a tree into the river and the river carries it to another area, another place, another ecosystem. Maybe humans come in, take the trees, chop them off and leave with them. We're taking matter out of that ecosystem. So that's what an open system is, okay? It's a place where things can enter and leave, right? So now let's contrast that to a closed system. So a closed system, the only one that's realistic that we can think of is the Earth. The Earth is considered a closed system because first of all, what is a closed system? Quickly define it here. It's a system where only energy can pass in and out. So sunlight can come in and heat energy can leave, but not matter. So the organisms on the planet, the tree cannot leave the Earth. The monkey cannot leave the Earth, right? They stay there and nothing can enter. Like it's very rare examples. Like for example, sometimes a meteorite or an asteroid might hit the Earth and deposit some matter, some organic matter or whatnot. Or maybe sometimes we send something to outer space, but that's like negligible. We ignore that. So other than that, the Earth is considered a closed system. So what that means is everything that's there is there and nothing new is going to come there and nothing is going to leave. So that means for this area to be sustainable, things must be recycled. Matter must be recycled. And that's what we learned about this whole video. We know when things die, they will be passed on to the next trophic level. Decomposers can recycle it, the nutrients, the organic matter into inorganic matter so plants can use it along with sunlight to do photosynthesis. And this whole cycle will be sustained. So a closed system needs to be like the Earth. It's just one where things cannot leave. Therefore, matter must be recycled for things to continue. So that's really it. It's not a big deal, okay? I made it a whole title, but it's not a big deal. Just make sure you understand the difference between open and closed system. It's really not a big matter. Worst case, to ask you a definition question or something, not a big deal. Okay, big brain people, let's run through primary versus secondary production. Then we'll have a sort of a nice break where we'll do some questions and answers based on this content. Then we'll move on again to coming back to content before we finish off attacking some more questions. Just so you guys can have like a mental break. I can imagine it's been a lot of content. Okay, let's do it here for you guys. So why did I make a whole slide on this? Because it's really not even that crazy. It's pretty straightforward to understand, but you guys may need to know it for some definition or something like that. But it's not heavy. It's not a heavy concept. So let's get into it. Look at this circle here. You can see on the right half of this circle, you can see a biome. A biome is something you guys will learn in another chapter. So if you don't know that term, doesn't matter. This is a biome. This is a tropical rainforest. So here, this kind of area has a lot of rainfall and a lot of high temperatures. So it's very good for plants. They love it and they can thrive and grow and increase their number. Whereas this one here is tundra. So this area is very cold, little rainfall. So it's more snowy and cold and very little plants because it's not very nice environment for plants to grow. So what is primary production? It refers to the biomass generated by the activity of producers. So remember, producers, right? They use sunlight. Well, at least Autotrophs do. They use sunlight to convert sunlight into organic matter, right? So they can grow themselves. They can grow fruits. They can grow bigger. They can reproduce, things like that. So this is primary production. The biomass, the mass, the weight of plants or producers generated as they thrive. Like, so they're gonna get, so for example, as an example, this area will have a much higher primary production compared to this area because plants here will grow much faster and much more weight will be accumulated. Remember, biomass is the dry weight of a certain organism. So in this case, plants. So you can imagine, like I just said, places with a lot of sunlight will have much higher primary production because the plants will thrive and their biomass will increase much faster compared to colder places with less sunlight. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to drag something here. All right, so before I go on to this I don't even know part, I'm gonna go to this part. So secondary production, this is pretty much the addition of biomass, so getting heavier in any level beyond the producer level. So when a jerboa eats a cactus, it's consuming organic matter and it's getting heavier. Its biomass is increasing. That's secondary production. So because organisms like these, they need to move around and they burn a lot of energy from cell respiration and release a lot of it as heat, right? So they break down the food they ate very fast. Secondary production is much lower than primary production because plants don't need to run around and things like that. So they don't really burn the food that they make as much compared to secondary production. Because remember, plants also do cell respiration to sustain themselves, to make ATP so they can survive. Not only animals, but they do it at a slower rate compared to animals. So because these guys burn much more of the stuff they eat, secondary production is much lower because as soon as they take it in, they burn it down. So they never actually gain mass as fast compared to plants do. All right. So yeah, how do they do that? They take a plant, the organic matter a plant's made up of, they put in their mouth, they break it down and they assemble and make their own proteins, their own carbohydrates, whatever they need. Okay, so this last part I wanted to extend out here was I don't even know. I don't know why it's important, but it's here. It's some 2 keywords. They could ask you it, but it's really not hard. Basically, gross primary production is the mass of a plant or a carbon compound, so in this case a plant, made during photosynthesis. So as this thing does photosynthesis, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. That's GPP, okay? But remember, plants do cell respiration, so they will burn some of that glucose that they make, and they will also lose weight slowly. Okay, so they both gain weight through photosynthesis and they will lose a little bit of weight through cell respiration. So NPP, the net primary production, is the biomass that they have remaining after they do cell respiration, because they will make their own biomass and then they will burn some of it off with cell respiration. So NPP is the biomass available for the consumers to eat after the plant did its cell respiration and stuff like that. So the actual amount remaining, okay, it's the amount that that is actually left after cell respiration. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. So let's do some questions, guys. Finally, we are here. Do some questions and answers before we move on to the next batch. So below is shown a pyramid of energy. Which is the suitable unit? I told you, this is actually a modified past paper question, so it's not me making this up. You need to know the unit for the numbers indicated on the successive trophic levels, okay? So it's showing the energy levels, each trophic level, producer, primary consumer, secondary, tertiary, and you can see. So what's the unit? Remember, it includes time and meters, so distance, and the kilojoules, okay? You need to know this. Remember this. It's such a stupid thing, but somehow they ask it in the IB, okay? Okay, so the answer is C. Which organism in a food chain is found in the second trophic level? So this is a bit of a tricky thing because most students then think secondary consumer. But remember, the first level is the producer. The second level is the primary consumer. So it's a play on words, so don't be confused by that. So it's A. Next one here. What is the trophic level of the meerkat? So this is going to play on the idea that certain organisms can be on their trophic level can vary depending what food chain we're looking at. So a meerkat can be either, see if this is the producer, a meerkat can be the primary consumer. So this one, 3 is true, but it can also be a secondary consumer if we look at this food chain. So the beetle is the primary consumer, and then the meerkat eats the beetle. In that case, it is the secondary consumer. So 1 and 3 is true, but there's no food chain that we can look at in this picture that allows it to be a tertiary consumer. So the answer is going to be 1 and 3, which is going to be B. Okay, so hopefully that is obviously way more questions. Go check out teachme.org for tons and tons and tons of more questions, IB style questions that'll help you nail your test. These are just a few to incorporate into the video for you guys. At this point, you guys gotta be so tired of hearing my voice. It's probably been like an hour, but don't worry guys, we're almost there. We're almost there. We're now gonna move on to the carbon cycle. And just for you guys, we're changing the slides up a little bit in the sense that it's been all white background for the last hour for you guys. We're gonna change it so the background's darker. Just why not? Because make it a little bit of a switch up in this video. So let's go on to the carbon cycle. Look at this little cute birdie. We got our environment here. We're going to use this environment now to explain the whole carbon cycle. Here's our little birdie swimming, flying around. Now the thing here is carbon. Okay, we have a word here, a very important word called the biosphere. The biosphere is any place on our planet that can have living things. Okay, so our biosphere can be divided into 3 key things: the atmosphere, because we can have birds there. It can divide it into the hydrosphere, which is just anywhere that there's water, and the lithosphere, which is just anywhere that there's land. Now, carbon, right? Don't think of carbon just as carbon dioxide. Carbon is very important and it exists everywhere in our biosphere. It can exist in the air as carbon dioxide, as we know. It can exist inside me and you as proteins, as any of the 4 macromolecules, really. Proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids. It can exist in water as dissolved carbon dioxide, so carbonic acid. It can exist in the soil or deep in the soil as fossils, right, when fossilization happens. So don't think of carbon just as carbon dioxide. So when we talk about the carbon cycle, we're going to see how carbon is moved around inside our biosphere, how all the organisms kind of link together and how it works, okay? But we're going to break it down into talking about the carbon cycle 300 years ago, and then we're going to talk about the carbon cycle today, because you're going to see a huge one key difference that's very important to stress for you guys. All right, so let's get started here. So I put a bunch of arrows now, and I put them without label, so you can try and label them. But the arrows are representing what we call carbon flux, basically the direction in which carbon is moving in some sort of way. We're going to label them on the soon, so I just want to give you a chance to label what you think is causing this carbon flux, the movement of carbon in the direction of the arrow. But now I'll show you, okay? So here we go. So we can see here, there are many ways in which carbon can move. So in our atmosphere, carbon is mainly in the form of carbon dioxide, right? The inorganic form, so carbon dioxide. Now, what causes carbon dioxide to go into the atmosphere or go away from the atmosphere? So we can see here, when we look here, carbon dioxide is produced, okay? Usually, oh yeah, by the way, I want to define that now. So carbon source is a net producer of carbon dioxide. So anything that makes carbon dioxide more than it uses carbon dioxide, that's a carbon source. So I'll give you some examples here. Cell respiration. So let's take a look at Ronaldo here. He's an organism, and he's gonna, when he eats food and stuff, he's gonna break it down to make ATP. And as a byproduct, we know we make carbon dioxide, which he's gonna exhale, and it's gonna go into the atmosphere, right? That's one way. Even this cow can do it. Even this detrivore can do it, okay? Any kind of decomposer can do it. So all of these things, even a plant, remember a plant does cell respiration as well, not just photosynthesis. They also need to make ATP to survive. So all of these things, all trophic levels can do cell respiration, and that as a byproduct, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And I'll stress later how important it is, but this is one of the main ways which carbon dioxide goes into our atmosphere, okay? Not volcanic activity, cell respiration is one of the main ways, the main way that you guys should know about. So there is other ways like volcanic activity when there's explosions and volcanic eruptions, some carbon dioxide is released, but it's much more minor compared to cell respiration by all our trophic levels. Okay, right. So that's carbon flux into the atmosphere, okay? Now, what can reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? You can imagine plants are very, very freaking important. They can do photosynthesis, which is amazing. That's a process by which we use carbon dioxide, remember, and water and sunlight to make glucose or make other organic molecules so the plant can grow and stuff like that, right? So that process reduces carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So plants are very important at reducing our carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere, okay? So that's gonna be a carbon sink. So a carbon sink is any net absorber of carbon dioxide, as opposed to a net absorber just means it absorbs more than it makes. So a plant, although a plant can do cell respiration, it absorbs more by photosynthesis than it releases by cell respiration. So we can say a plant is an example of a carbon sink because it takes more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere than it releases. Okay. But remember, also things like bacteria can do photosynthesis as well. And also, very important, oceans. So I remember I told you before that carbon dioxide can diffuse into bodies of water like the ocean, like a lake or river. And as it goes into the water, it dissolves into it. So it's technically removed from the atmosphere. So that's one way. So an ocean is another example of a carbon sink. And we'll talk about that idea of why that's a bad thing if there's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because then it dissolves too much in the bodies of water, and that can result in ocean acidification, but that's for another chapter, so don't worry about that for now. You'll learn about that in climate change. Okay, what else? So we talked now about the atmospheric carbon dioxide, right? So now remember, carbon dioxide is not only, carbon is not only in the form of carbon dioxide, so what else is it? When a plant does photosynthesis, carbon is now stored inside the plant as glucose, as any other kind of organic form, right? So now you can imagine this photosynthesis now allows this tree to form. So now another organism in the food chain, so for example, a primary consumer like this cow from Barnyard, Otis, can now eat it, okay? And in doing so, now he's gonna eat the organic thing, organic components of this thing, like carbohydrates or whatnot, and take it into his body. So now carbon is being moved from this plant to the cow, okay? So that's one way. Feeding is one way in which carbon can move in the carbon cycle. All right. Now, same way here, how Ronaldo, if he's on a lucky day, he's ready, he's on a cheat day and he wants to eat some fatty cow, he can do it, right? And same way, it's moved from the cow to him, the carbon. Also, when Ronaldo dies or the cow dies, very sad scenario here, right? Very sad. We don't want Ronaldo to die, man. The legend, the GOAT. And if he dies, where's his carbon gonna go? He's made up of carbon, right? So his carbon is then gonna go into the soil. It can either be decomposed, so carbon can then move to the decomposers, which can use it to again sustain themselves and recycle it in the form of nutrients, right? But it can also go into fossil fuel. So if it stays in the soil long enough and over time it goes deeper and deeper into the soil, that becomes fossil fuels, right? Which is just a very dense, compacted carbon that is isolated under the ground. Okay, it can't go anywhere. Okay, it's stuck there. It's being condensed over time as more and more of it accumulates, dead organisms going there. Okay, so that's the key thing here. So I wanna right before we move on, I wanna say something. So you may need to draw a carbon cycle, for example, on your test or something. And obviously you're not going to draw crazy trees and cows like this and really artistic things. So on the test, no one is going to care if you instead of drawing this cow, make a little box, okay? And write in it cow or primary consumer. Or instead of Ronaldo, write secondary consumer. Instead of drawing a volcano, write volcano. Instead of okay, you know what I mean? So instead of drawing the pictures, draw a square box and write the name in it, okay? Because no one is gonna care if you draw a cow or if you draw a box with a name in it, okay? People get the idea. And for exam, you don't wanna waste time and draw these fancy diagrams. So use boxes to simulate these areas where carbon goes, okay? Or where carbon comes from. and arrows to show where it's going. Okay, awesome. So now let's go on to show how this diagram will change if we move to how it looks like today for the carbon cycle. It's going to be a subtle change, so I want you to pay attention. So first of all, our birdie moved all the way here, okay? Anyways, we can see what's new. Buildings, factories, all these kinds of things exist nowadays, and it's actually impacting our carbon cycle a little bit. See, even here, Ronaldo with his barbecue, man. Okay, so remember, what I want to show here first is the biggest thing that changed to our carbon cycle is under the category of carbon dioxide produced. So because, you know, I told you before, right? When we die and things like that, over time, fossilization happens. So our organic material starts compacting under the ground, and it basically becomes a very dense source of carbon. Okay, carbon, that's basically what fossil fuels are. Okay, coal and things like that. It's just really condensed carbon that compacted over a very, very, very long time, millions of years, and is stored in this unique form, which we call fossil fuels. That's really it. It's still a source of carbon. Now, the thing is, it takes super long for this to happen, millions of years, not like 5 minutes, it takes forever. And the thing is, now, what we're doing as humans is we're digging up these fossil fuels, whatever they may be, if they're coal, if they're gas, if they're oil, any of these forms of fossilization that happened over a very long time. Now we're digging them up, okay? We're digging them up, and what we're doing is we're burning them to generate heat, to generate electricity and things like that in our homes, right? And to build factories. We're burning a lot of things, okay? Even to the extent that it's influencing our carbon cycle. So now, what we're doing is now we're creating another source of carbon dioxide production, okay? So combustion is the burning of, right? So we're burning now organic material that used to be, that was fossil fuels that's deep under our ground. We're going to talk a bit more about that soon. But when we burn them, the process of combustion releases lots of carbon dioxide. So now we're actually increasing the amount of carbon dioxide on our planet. And you may ask, what's the bad thing about this? So when you guys learn about climate change, you'll learn that carbon dioxide is the reason for contributing to our greenhouse effect. So it's causing the earth to become warmer because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. So it likes to trap heat on our planet. So it's part of the reason why we're having climate change. Okay, so that's a big, big deal that we need to understand. It's not even just fossil fuels, man. One big other thing I want to mention here is we're also impacting this area here. Look. So we're impacting the carbon dioxide production by increasing combustion of organic material, but we're also reducing carbon dioxide absorption. How are we doing that? We are killing plants. Deforestation. You know before, how we talked about before here, a carbon sink, right? A forest or a lot of plants, they're carbon sinks because they take in more carbon dioxide than they produce. But guess what we're doing? We're burning down forests. When we burn down a forest, we're changing this carbon sink, the forest that used to bring and attract a lot of carbon dioxide, we're changing it now into a carbon source because now we're doing combustion, so we're releasing a lot of carbon dioxide. And by burning down all these forests, now we have less trees to absorb this carbon dioxide. So we're affecting both of these categories, okay? Both of these, producing more carbon dioxide and killing things that take away carbon dioxide, okay? By the way, here's the key word I wanted you to know. And I want to stress here that the main fluxes is these two. Cell respiration is the main flux causing carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, and photosynthesis is the main one taking it away, because they like to ask this in multiple choice. Then I'll have a volcano there and ocean uptake there, and you should know which one is the most impactful. Cell respiration is most impactful to increasing carbon dioxide, and photosynthesis is the most impactful to reducing it. Just remember that. But now we have burning fossil fuels, which is contributing to carbon dioxide. It's not the main one, okay, but it's now increasing the amount that used to be sustainable. All right. So we gotta talk now a bit more about this part here. The whole part about how over a long period of time, we get these carbons that are deep under the ground, very condensed form, that stores a lot of potential energy, because if we burn them, we can get a lot of energy out of that. So we got to talk a bit more about these kind of energy sources that the humans now use, which used to never be touched, right? Long time ago, this was stayed under the ground. No one cared about it, but now we're causing trouble here. So we can divide these, like in general, energy resources into three categories. You've probably seen this before when you're a bit younger. Renewable and non-renewable. And there's this intermediate category, which is long-term renewable. Slight difference. Okay, so renewable just means daily. Like you can get more of this every day. You don't have to wait a long time to get more of it. Okay, so this is everything like wind, sunshine. It's there every day. Biomass, like living organisms. They're there every day. They're not going anywhere, right? Then we have long-term renewable. So these are sources of energy, sources of carbon that take quite a long time to form, decades to hundreds of years. So if we take all of it away, we have to wait quite a while before some more will form. So as long as we're not taking more than what is being formed, it is then technically renewable. Okay, so that can include peat bogs, which we'll talk about a bit later in this video, and forests. Okay, as long as we don't take too many of the forests compared to how fast they're forming, then it's fine. And then we have the non-renewable ones. These take millions of years. So because they take so long to form, we consider it non-renewable. The second you take it, it's gone. We're not going to wait a million years for more to form, right? All right. So these include things like coal, coal, crude oil, and gas, okay? All of these are non-renewable sources. Let's take a little quick look at a picture of how these kind of form. Kind of interesting. So basically, you have some environment, okay? A specific environment. Let me turn this. And what happens is this environment, organisms are going to die, right? And when they die, guess what they do? They sink. This can be above land or this can be in the ocean or just normal above land organisms. And when they die, they fall into the soil, they get decomposed by the decomposers, and some of the carbon lodges in the soil, right? And if this happens, you can think about it, and then they die. If this happens over a long period of time, so organisms die, then after a while more organisms die and pile on top of them, and then after another while more organisms die and pile on top of them, we get this huge accumulation, piling, and if we wait long enough, like I'm saying millions of years, then we end up getting these areas that are so, because of the high pressure and temperature caused by the accumulation of things lying on. Imagine 10,000 of your friends lying on you. I'm pretty sure you'd become freaking coal as well. Okay, so because of the time and the pressure causing this the squishing of all these dead organic matter, it eventually becomes these kind of things like peat bogs. The peat, which is a long-term renewable one, and even after even longer time, it becomes coal and crude oil, natural gas, and now we're finding ways to dig so deep and find those areas and extract them to use them for combustion, okay, for all the purposes that we mentioned before, for heating things and electricity and all that. Okay, so let me show you the picture again. Things die, blah blah blah. After a relatively short period of time, it will form things like peat, which is not as dense and doesn't take as long as these guys, okay? So it's considered long-term renewable. But after a very long time, even longer, we form these kind of things that are really deep under the ground, because peat is not that deep. It's like it forms first, and after a long time, then peat will turn into these things, okay? So it's kind of a stage in fossil fuel formation, all right? So, and the point is, anyways, I just want to show you a little bit about how they form. But like I said, coming back to this, we're taking those now and burning them, releasing all this carbon dioxide, changing our carbon cycle. So that's something very important to note. But don't worry about anything more related to this. We're going to talk a little bit about peat soon in this video. So related to the carbon cycle, we have to talk about the Keeling Curve, okay? It sounds, the guy who made this curve, his name is Keeling. That's really the only reason why it's called the Keeling Curve. Now this is very interesting. So the Keeling Curve is a little graph that shows our carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere over a certain period of time. So the specific organization that did this is called the NOAA. Don't worry about it. They're just known because they have done this for the longest period of time. So we like their data because it's for a long period of time. Other organizations have done it, but for shorter periods of time. This experiment or this monitoring is going on in the US, okay, and specifically this little island. And this island is chosen because it's very far away from industrialized zones. So it's not biased, because if it was located right next to a factory, then the carbon dioxide levels would be inaccurate to represent the average of the world. So it's really going to some place where there's no pollution and things like that to measure the carbon dioxide, okay? Cool. So this curve, notice two things. The x-axis here is time. Y-axis is just amount, okay? And the unit they like to use is parts per million, okay? But it's just a way to measure quantity of carbon dioxide, okay? Now you can notice, what do you notice about this curve? It is kind of exponential. It's not linear. You can see ever since you can imagine like a while back it was kind of plateaued here. If we went even before the 1960s, it was kind of very flat. So ever since the 1960s, ever since like the time of the Industrial Revolution and things like that, carbon dioxide levels have been going up exponentially, faster and faster, because of all the combustion and factories and things going on. Basically, ever since factories have started existing more prevalently around the world. So what we can say is the Keeling curve clearly shows, okay, this white line, it clearly shows a positive trend. Okay, it's increasing, but it's showing an exponential trend. It's not linear. Okay, not linear. And why do you think it's not linear? So it's mainly because of human activity. So anthropogenic reasons, human caused reasons. We know that. Now, one thing about this curve that I didn't put here is now what I'm putting now is in reality, the curve looks like this. So the white line that I showed you is the average trend, average, okay? This is the real trend. Now I might ask you, so why the heck is there this like oscillating pattern? We call this oscillating when it goes up and down. The real curve is oscillating like that. Why is it? You can kind of guess. When we look at this, the oscillating pattern is due to summer and winter. So in the summer, you can imagine obviously much more sunlight and things like that. So where compared to winter. So during the summer, the organisms will obviously use, the plants especially, the Autotrophs will use much more of the carbon dioxide and extract it from the atmosphere compared to in winter when there's much less sunlight and photosynthesis happens less, right? So that's why. So that's what you can see in the winter, it's more up. The carbon dioxide levels higher because less photosynthesis happening compared to the summer where more photosynthesis is happening. So this red line I have here is the oscillating pattern. That's a true line. The white line is really showing the average. Okay, so that's it. That's all you guys need to know. So make sure you know how to describe this trend. It's a positive trend that is oscillating due to the seasons. Okay, and why it's increasing due to human activity. That's good. That's good to go. All right, guys, we made it. We're at the last little chapter here, methane. Okay, and here we're actually going to talk about peat bogs as well, okay? But it should be pretty quick, pretty straightforward. Let's get straight to it. Look at this crazy environment here. Leaves falling, not even the same leaves from this tree. Fish moving, whatever. It's mad here. It's mad. Okay, so we're going to talk first about wetlands and methane. So wetlands are basically any kind of area that is of land that is generally always a bit flooded with water. So it's very wet. It's a very wet area, but things still grow there. Plants grow and fish live there, and it's still a functioning environment. It's just wet. That's what they call wetland. Now, generally, because of this odd circumstance, we have some weird circumstance going on. Let me show you. Because of this odd circumstance, we have unusual things living here. So, for example, in this area, there loves to be a kind of bacteria called a methanogen. Okay, methanogen. Let me show you. These guys, basically, they make methane when they break food down. Now, they live here because they like anaerobic conditions. So in this area, we have lots of these anaerobic methanogens. They live in this area, and they're a bit like decomposers. They break things down, okay? They work on dead material. But because they're anaerobic, they don't need oxygen, which is why they like to live here, because under the water, there's very little oxygen levels, but they're okay with that because they're anaerobic organisms, all right? Now, the thing is, when we have some fish die, okay? When we have some fish die, it's going to go to the bottom of this area, of this wetland. And now here it's going to be acted on by decomposers and things like that. But because of this odd environment, there's not that many decomposers, and we'll see how that relates to peat formation. But anyways, when they die, now what's going to act on them is these guys, anaerobic methanogens. We can also call them Methanotrophs, right? They're these anaerobic bacteria. And when they act on these dead things, as a byproduct, right, they break them down. As a byproduct, they make methane, okay? Methane. Not carbon dioxide like decomposers normally do, right? They make methane, so that's odd. Now, methane is special because, as you'll see when you guys learn about the greenhouse gases in climate change chapter, this is a key greenhouse gas. And it's also dangerous because it's a greenhouse gas, but after spending some time in the atmosphere, it can be converted into carbon dioxide, which is contributing to our carbon cycle that we've been talking about this whole time. So wetlands can also contribute to carbon dioxide indirectly by making methane, which can be converted into carbon dioxide, right? That's very important to understand. And both of these are greenhouse gases, so they can add to the climate change effect, which we'll learn about in another chapter. So these are very common in wetlands, blah, blah, blah. But not only are they here, you know, inside your gut, it's also very harsh circumstances. There's also very low oxygen levels, and very few things can live there. But these guys can live there as well because they are like anaerobic conditions, very low oxygen conditions. So they also live in your gut, especially in cattle. And that's actually causing a big concern because farmers now are making more and more cattle. These guys keep farting out methane the whole time because of these bacteria that's making methane. And the only way to get out your body is when they fart. Then they cause a lot of methane buildup in the atmosphere, just these cows, and they can contribute to our greenhouse gas and hence the greenhouse effect. So that's it for wetlands and methane production and how that relates to the carbon cycle a bit. Now we're going to talk about wetlands and peat. So in these same weird environments, wetlands, what happens is when organisms die, like this fish, because let me show you here. Because these conditions are very weird, so there's very low oxygen, as I mentioned, it's very wet, and there's also high acidity. These areas, these wetlands, for some or other reason, the soil tends to be very acidic for one or other reason that you guys don't have to worry about. But because of these harsh conditions, many normal decomposers can't survive. And because these decomposers can't really survive, then there are very little things that can break down things that are dying. Because usually the decomposers, they're meant to break down all of these dead organic matter. But since these conditions are so weird, when things die, there's very few decomposers to break them down. So now the only thing left to act are the few that are there. So they're not going to do such a good job. So that means over time, it's very easy for these dead things to build up and form layers and layers and layers, similar to what I mentioned here. And then we know after a few decades or hundreds of years of these layer formation, we can form peat. So in these wetlands, peat can form. So it's very cool because it's a source of fossil fuel. It's a source of fuel. So farmers and things like that can dig these out, dehydrate them, so make them dry, and they can cut them into slabs, like little pieces of brick, basically, and they can use them to generate heat. They can burn them, use them basically like you would use wood. So that's what I wanted to talk about here with peat. So now you should understand a little bit more peat and where it comes from and how it doesn't take as long to form as these other sources of energy. So that's it for wetlands. All you need to know about them, know about methane production, carbon dioxide, and how peat can form under these three conditions. It does come up in multiple choice. Know all three of these conditions contribute to peat formation. Yes. Now, let's go on to questions, guys. We're at the end here. Let's do some questions. Last batch here. So below is a schematic diagram of the carbon cycle, which arrow represents the process of cellular respiration. We know animals can do cell respiration, plants can do cell respiration, any trophic level can do it. So let's find the arrow that represents that. Here we have green plants, and we can see carbon is going from the green plant into the atmosphere. That happens during cell respiration, so it must be A, okay? And again, guys, I don't want to bore you guys with this, but teachme.org, bomb website, go check it out. Okay, next one. Which of the following is not a way carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere? Dissolution into oceans. We saw when they dissolve into oceans, that's a way the carbon dioxide can be removed. Photosynthesis, that is a way that it can be removed. Combustion of organic matter, that is not a way it can be removed. So the answer here is C. Guys, again, check out teachme.org for more questions. Which human activity has the most significant impact on increasing the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide? We know it's going to be straightforward. It's going to be burning of fossil fuels. Okay? It's going to be D. So guys, I hope that was useful. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of content, but hopefully it was interesting and entertaining. Hopefully you got all the key things you need to out. Go check out teachme.org for goodness sake, for great notes and tons of IB style questions to help you guys out. See you guys in the next one.